Picture this. It's 6:07 a.m., the sun's just peeking over the rooftops, birds are singing their morning tune, and I'm shuffling to my driveway, travel mug in hand, still shaking off sleep. Then, wham! My eyes lock onto my EV charging station, now sporting a rusted, clunky padlock slapped onto a crooked hasp. Someone drilled into it. A laminated sign screaming in Comic Sans of all fonts is taped on with pink duct tape, reserved by HOA order, property of guarantee. Pink. Nail polish smudges and bent screws mock me from the scratched-up panel. This wasn't a dream, it was a heist. And the culprit? Karen. Oh, you know the type, clipboard-wielding cul-de-sac dictator with a no jogging on grass sign and a mailbox that texts her when it opens. She once fined a neighbor for a flag that waved too enthusiastically. When she got her shiny new plug-in hybrid and couldn't get HOA approval for her own charger, she didn't negotiate. She targeted my city-permitted, hard-earned charger right on my own property. I dropped to my knees, heart racing, spotting greasy fingerprints and dollar store tool marks. Fury bubbled up as I stormed inside, pulling up my security app. There she was at 3 a.m., waddling across my lawn in an oversized hoodie, dragging a diaper bag stuffed with tools, thinking she'd outsmart me. Karen had no idea she'd just sparked a war. Buckle up, because this story's about to charge up fast. Which city in the United States are you watching from? Drop a comment and share with us if you've had any run-ins with an HOA. We'll narrate your story on our channel. Her toddler was tagging along, wearing sunglasses and holding a flashlight like they were casing a bank. Karen crouched by my charging port, pulled out a power drill and began hacking at the siding like it was drywall. It took her 15 minutes to install the monstrosity. She even paused midway to give her child a juice box. It was like watching an episode of a reality show produced by toddlers and paranoia. I sat there in my kitchen watching the footage over and over, my jaw clenched. I knew if I called the hoe, I'd get nothing. The last time I reported Karen for putting a motion sensor sprinkler on the community sidewalk, they told me she was just trying to protect the hedges. She had them wrapped around her finger tighter than that padlock on my charger. Still, I tried. I emailed. I called. I even showed up at the HOA office with the footage on a flash drive and a printout of my charger. Permit. The secretary squinted at the screen and said, "So what exactly is the problem? The charger is still functional, right?" I blinked in disbelief. Did she really just say that I asked if they were okay with residents installing locks on private property? And her response was, Karen submitted a temporary requisition for community shared use. It's in the bylaws under emergency power pooling. Emergency power pooling. For what a bake sale apocalypse? I asked if anyone approved it. She said the president hadn't denied it. Apparently, in HOA logic, silence equals permission. My blood pressure surged. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at my ceiling, replaying the footage, thinking about that smirk Karen always had whenever she got her way. Then it hit me. I'm not just a homeowner, I'm a robotics engineer. My day job is designing autonomous security systems for commercial warehouses. I build machines that track, respond, and counteract intrusion, and Karen just gave me the perfect excuse to get creative. Over the next 2 days, I started drawing up plans. If Karen wanted to mess with tech, I'd give her tech. I built a dummy charger shell with an internal paint delivery system. It used a compressed air canister, motion sensors, and a valve rig to open when the wrong lock was tampered with. The nozzle was aimed upward, just enough to spray a person in the face and upper torso. The paint mixture was neon pink, environmentally safe, washable only after 10 rinses, and glowed under UV light. I had developed it for a warehouse theft deterrent system. It had never been field tested until now. The build took 5 hours. I recorded the entire process like a science experiment, narrating each step in case I needed it for legal purposes. I installed the dummy shell in the exact spot where Karen had drilled into my actual charger, which I had now temporarily relocated to my backyard. I kept the original lock in place so she wouldn't suspect anything. Then I waited. The next morning, I saw nothing. The following night, nothing again. But on the third night, at 2:54 a.m., the motion alert on my phone buzzed. I leapt out of bed, eyes bloodshot, heart pounding, and pulled up the live feed. And there she was, Karen, in her oversized hoodie again, clutching a thermos in one hand, and her keys in the other. Her toddler was asleep in a stroller beside her. She bent down, fumbled with the lock for a few seconds, and then thung his form. The paint shot upward like a geyser. Karen shrieked, stumbled back, slipped on her own Crocs and landed flat on her backside. Her entire face, chest, and arms were drenched in fluorescent pink. The camera caught every second in HD. She looked like a rejected cartoon villain. Her stroller rolled a few feet away and bumped gently into a bush. Karen tried to stand, but slipped again. Her hands were glowing. Her hair dripped pink, like she'd bathed in melted crayons. I saved the footage in 3 formats, uploaded it to my cloud drive, and saved a copy on a USB shaped like a miniature lock. Then I called the police. They arrived 20 minutes later. Karen was still in my driveway shouting about sabotage, shaking her fists like a street performer on a caffeine binge. The officers didn't arrest her, but they did warn her about trespassing and damaging private property. When she tried to blame it all on the HOA, the officer said, "Ma'am, the HOA doesn't give you the right to drill into someone's home setup, especially not at 2 in the morning. As the cruiser drove off, I stood at my window sipping coffee and watching Karen stomp away, glowing pink under the streetlights. It was in that moment I realized something. This wasn't over. She wasn't just humiliated, she was mad. And people like Karen don't walk away, they double down. Which meant I had to be ready, because whatever she was planning next, it wasn't going to be logical. It was going to be personal and messy. The sun rose over the neighborhood like nothing had happened, but I knew better. I opened my door just in time to hear a distant shriek echo from Karen's direction. My camera system had already sent me the footage from last night. Her screaming, slipping, drenched in fluorescent pink, crawling on my driveway like a startled possum. And I had to admit I replayed it more times than I'd like to admit. But as satisfying as it was, I also knew it would only provoke her more. Karen wasn't the type to reflect and back off. She was the type who took humiliation as a challenge. So while the neighborhood quietly giggled behind their windows and pretended not to notice her glowing hair, I spent the morning preparing for the fallout. Sure enough, at precisely 9:06 a.m., I got an email from the HO. The subject line was disciplinary notice, and it was worded like I had personally painted a child's face with acid. They claimed I had violated HOA Rule 6B, which apparently prohibited dangerous mechanical installations. They included a blurry screenshot of Karen's paint-drenched face like it was evidence of war crimes. The email ended with a threat, a $2,000 fine, and a pending vote to suspend my HOA voting right. I laughed out loud when I read that part. Suspend my rights because I protected my own charger from a trespassing paint magnet that was rich. I didn't respond immediately. I had learned from experience that timing was everything. Instead, I forwarded the footage and the email to Jenna, my lawyer friend, who owed me a favor after I helped automate her dad's greenhouse last year. She called me within the hour, already furious on my behalf. After watching the footage, she practically begged me to let her handle it. "Miles, you have her on video trespassing, damaging your property, and tampering with electrical equipment. They're trying to find you because she embarrassed herself. This is textbook HOA overreach. Let me eat them alive. I didn't even need convincing. Jenna had been waiting for an excuse to roast an HOA since law school. While Jenna began assembling her legal response, I made a trip to my garage. The dummy charger had done its job, but I wasn't about to retire it yet. Karen hadn't just tried to steal my power. She had tried to rewrite the rules to make herself look like the victim. That meant she wasn't done. She'd come back. Maybe not. Tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. And next time I wanted her to understand exactly how serious I could get. I installed an upgraded version of the paint bomb. This one had a retractable cover that concealed the nozzle when not in use, and a second layer of motion sensors that would only trigger if someone tampered with it in a specific sequence, her exact sequence. I also added a GPS tracker and synced it to my smartwatch just in case she tried to steal the unit altogether. But the real twist was the pain. I had developed a new mixture that included micro-glitter and a UV tracer compound. Not harmful at all, but it would make her look like a disco ball under blacklight for at least a week. This was psychological warfare now, no injuries, just unforgettable embarrassment. Later that afternoon, I got an unexpected knock at my door. I opened it cautiously, half expecting Karen with a bullhorn or a lawyer. Instead, it was her husband, Doug, holding a plastic folder and looking like he hadn't slept in days. He offered a weak smile and said he wanted to talk. I let him in mostly. Out of curiosity, Doug was the quiet type. Always seemed like he was trying not to be noticed. We sat down at my kitchen table, and he immediately began apologizing for the lock, for the trespassing, for everything. Then he handed me the folder. Inside were screenshot, text messages, voice, memos, all from Karen. In one of them, she was coaching her toddler to tell people that Miles gave us permission. In another, she was complaining to a friend about how the HOA was too stupid to stop her from claiming the charger. Doug said he was done covering for her. He was in the middle of preparing divorce papers. She crossed the line when she dragged their kid into her neighborhood war games. I stared at him for a moment, unsure if I should thank him or feel bad. In the end, I did both. I sent the folder to Jenna. She called me 5 minutes later, laughing so hard she couldn't speak. "These messages are gold," she finally managed to say. "We're not just responding to the fine, we're going on offense." By the next morning, Jenna had submitted a formal cease and desist letter to the HOA and demanded a retraction of the fine under the threat of a civil lawsuit. She included copies of the security footage, Doug's folder, and highlighted HOA bylaw inconsistencies. Her closing line was my favorite. "If your board continues to support a resident who installs foreign objects on private property and instructs a child to lie about it, we will assume this reflects the values of your entire leadership team. Let me be clear, that assumption will be made publicly. Within 24 hours, I received a new email from the HOA. It was ter and defensive, but said the fine was being withdrawn upon further review. No apology, of course, just a weak backpedal, but I didn't care. I had won the first battle, and Karen's reputation was already starting to collapse. Neighborhood gossip spread faster than paint in a sprinkler system. People started calling her Charger Karen. Someone even edited a photo of her with the word reserved stamped across her forehead. For a brief moment, I thought it might end there. But then, right before midnight, I got a new alert. My motion sensor had picked up activity again. I pulled up the feed and froze. Karen was back. She wasn't alone. This time, she had gloves, a flashlight duct taped to her head, and what looked like a crowbar in one hand. She walked straight up to the charging port and began fiddling with the same lock. My heart pounded. The paint bomb was armed, but something felt off. She wasn't just trying to unlock it, She was trying to remove it entirely. I watched as she inserted the crowbar into the base panel, jerking it upward. She paused when it resisted. Then she looked around nervously, gave it another yank, and that's when it happened. The nozzle fired, a loud hiss followed by a spray of rainbow glitter and UV paint coated her from chin to waist. But this time, she didn't scream. She just froze. For one bizarre second, it was like she didn't believe it. Then she looked down, saw the glitter sparkling across her chest, and let out the most guttural scream I'd ever heard. It wasn't anger. It wasn't embarrassment. It was pure existential rage. She staggered back, tripped on her own bag, and crashed into the hedge. This time, I didn't need to call the cop. My neighbor Ed across the street had already seen her from his window and was halfway down the sidewalk in his bathrobe with his phone recording. Karen tried to run but slipped again. Ed, between fits of laughter, narrated the whole thing like a documentary, and as the police rolled in 10 minutes later, I knew this wasn't just escalation anymore. This was a full-blown meltdown. She had just attacked a fake charger and got branded by a rainbow cannon. Whatever happened next, she wasn't going to be able to paint herself out of this one. The morning after Karen's second glitter explosion, things began to unravel faster than I expected. Word had already spread around the neighborhood thanks to Ed's commentary video, which he proudly titled Karen versus the Rainbow Trap. It had over 2,000 views by noon, which was impressive considering it was just being shared through group chats and neighborhood Facebook pages. People I hadn't spoken to in weeks sent me laughing emojis and popcorn gift. Someone even started a thread proposing we nominate the paint cannon for a community safety award. But behind the scenes, the situation was boiling over in ways even I hadn't anticipated. At precisely 10:04 a.m., I got a certified letter dropped on my porch by an HOA board member who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He didn't speak, just handed it over, and walked away like he was delivering bad news in a mafia movie. Inside was a formal complaint. According to the letter, the HOA was initiating disciplinary action due to my repeated use of unauthorized deterrent mechanisms that resulted in bodily harm and reputational damage to a resident. I laughed out loud. Bodily harm. She slipped on her own tote bag and tripped over a bush. Reputational damage. That ship had already sunk when she spray-painted a squirrel's tail last Easter and tried to frame the landscaping team. The letter also mentioned a motion being introduced to suspend my voting rights for a year and remove my property's eligibility for shared community utilities. That was their new term for the charger. Apparently, I sent the whole letter to Jenna, who was already several steps ahead. She responded with a draft of a countersuit complete with screenshots, timestamps, and links to HOA bylaws that proved the exact opposite of what they were claiming. Miles, we've got them boxed in, but that's not even the fun part. I just got a call from someone you're going to want to talk to. She didn't elaborate. Instead, she sent me a number and said to call. When I did, the man who answered had a deep voice and introduced himself as Agent Rowan from a federal agency I wasn't expecting to hear from. Apparently, Jenna had included in her previous letter a mention of a secure prototype that Karen had tampered with, and that part had triggered some red flags. Rowan asked if I had any devices on site that were under restricted testing. I said yes. The prototype was part of a sensor array being evaluated for perimeter defense systems. Nothing top secret, but sensitive enough that Karen's crowbar stunt could technically be considered interference with federal property. Rowan said they were sending someone to collect a formal statement and possibly examine the scene. My stomach dropped a little, not from fear, but from the sheer absurdity of how far things had escalated. This had started with a lock and a charger. Now federal agents were getting involved because Karen couldn't mind her own business. Meanwhile, across the street, Karen's house had become strangely quiet. The curtains were drawn, the car was missing. From the driveway, and for the first time in weeks, there were no passive-aggressive signs stuck in her front yard. But that calm was just surface level. I found out later from Doug, who had officially moved into a short-term rental down the block, that she had been calling emergency HOA meetings, trying to rally support to have me evicted. The problem was, no one wanted to join her crusade, if anything. Most of the neighbors were now afraid of getting pulled into her drama. The HOA president resigned midweek, claiming health issues, but everyone knew it was because of the explosion of complaints, not to mention the memes flooding his inbox. With the power vacuum left behind, Jenna helped file an injunction to block any disciplinary action until a proper hearing could be held. In response, the new interim board tried to delay the meeting indefinitely. That only made them look worse. By the weekend, I had neighbors offering to write character statements on my behalf. Even Ed, who once yelled at me for trimming my hedges too early in the season, knocked on my door with a fresh peach pie and said he'd testify. I didn't even know Ed baked. The support was unexpected, but deeply appreciated. But Karen wasn't finished. On Saturday night, she returned not to my property this time, but to her own driveway, where she set up what looked like a makeshift press conference. She had a ring light, a folding table, and a tripod. Her toddler sat nearby with noise and selling, headphones, and an iPad. Karen stood in front of her phone recording a dramatic monologue where she tearfully described being targeted, humiliated, and assaulted with hazardous chemicals. She claimed her hair was permanently damaged and her child now feared colors. She accused me of being a technological vigilante who had turned the neighborhood into a surveillance state. What she didn't know was that Doug had been quietly live-streaming the entire setup from the alley behind the house. He uploaded it in full with captions. Viewers quickly noticed how Karen dabbed fake tears with a tissue before any actually formed. Someone zoomed in and spotted that her hair was completely fine, just dyed a new shade. Another clip showed her pausing mid-spetch to adjust her angle for better lighting. The internet tore it apart. The video was renamed Oscar nominee Karen Goes, full drama mode, and was shared on several Reddit threads and a TikTok account that specialized in HOA meltdowns. The final blow came that Monday when Agent Rowan's team arrived. They weren't in black suits or sunglasses, just plain-clothed professionals with clipboards and digital scanners. They asked questions politely, took photos of the prototype. Karen had tried to pry off and thanked me for my documentation. They didn't arrest anyone. They didn't need to. The mere presence of federal agents walking up Karen's driveway with a printed warrant sent shockwaves through the entire block. A neighbor dog barked. Curtains twitched. Karen peeked through her blinds, then quickly shut them. Later that day, Doug informed me through a text that Karen had lawyered up. Not with a good lawyer, just some local guy she found online who also did divorce mediation and DUI defense. She was planning to file a harassment suit. Jenna laughed so hard when I told her that she actually spilled coffee on her keyboard. Let her try. We'll have counterclaims ready before she files the paperwork. And by the way, we're not stopping at defense. We're going after them for defamation, property damage, and violation of state trespass statute. She wants a fight. Let's give her one she won't forget. What struck me most was how fast things shifted. Just a week ago, I was trying to figure out how to deal with a lock on my charger. Now, I was fielding calls from legal teams, consulting federal agents, and wondering what it would take to end this madness. But something had changed in me too. I wasn't scared. I wasn't overwhelmed. I was focused. Karen thought she could bulldoze her way through rules and neighbors. But this time, she messed with someone who had the tools and the patience to fight back with precision. The days following the federal agent's visit were oddly quiet, almost too quiet. Karen's front yard had gone from looking like a passive-aggressive art exhibit to a barren, unwatered wasteland. The signs were gone, the flower pots overturned, and her toddler's tricycle sat abandoned on the porch, as if even the kid had given up on pretending things were normal. The neighborhood, however, was buzzing beneath the surface. People whispered, messaged, and met in driveways, speculating on what would come next. And deep down, I knew the silence wasn't a retreat. It was the build-up before a storm. Karen wasn't the type to lick her wounds and learn. She was the type to scheme. I was in my garage calibrating a drone when the new alert popped up on my security system. It was just past 3 a.m., the same time she usually struck. At first, I thought it was a cat or maybe a raccoon, but then I saw it on the camera feed. A figure moving low and slow behind the bushes, covered head to toe in black clothing with reflective strip. At first glance, it looked like a burglar or someone casing the house. But when they turned toward the camera and the porch light caught their face, I knew exactly who it was. Karen had returned, and this time she brought back up. There was someone else behind her, a man, not Doug. This guy was taller, stalkier, and clearly not from the neighborhood. He wore a baseball cap pulled low and had a tool bag slung across his shoulder. My instincts kicked in immediately. They crept toward the side of my property where the charger used to be, unaware that the setup they were approaching now was decoy number 2. This one wasn't rigged with paint. It didn't need to be. I had installed a silent alarm, a micro drone with thermal vision and a live mic linked straight to my phone. I stayed hidden inside my home office and listened. Karen whispered instructions like she'd rehearsed a heist movie. The man opened the tool bag and pulled out a portable angle grinder. Sparks flew as he attempted to cut through the casing of the decoy panel. What they didn't realize was that I had upgraded my system since the last time. The moment the grinder made contact, a signal was sent directly to Agent Rowan's office, triggering a tamper alert. I watched from my monitor as Karen giggled nervously, her voice trembling as she said something about finally ending the nerd's reign of terror. I didn't need to wait for consequences anymore. The law was already in motion. 10 minutes later, a black SUV turned the corner at the end of the street. No lights, no sirens, just quiet power. It parked half a block away and 2 plain closed. Agents stepped out and moved swiftly toward my house. Karen didn't see them coming. Her partner was halfway through yanking open the decoy panel when the first agent shone a light directly into his face and shouted, "Federal agents, don't move!" Karen screamed and bolted, leaving the poor guy tangled in cords and blinking blindly like a deer caught in high beams. By the time they were both detained, neighbors were already gathering, robes and slippers on, phones recording. The man was placed in handcuff. Karen wasn't, but she was given a very stern talking to that she tried to interrupt at least 5 times before one of the agents raised his voice and told her to be quiet or be arrested. She finally shut up. For the first time ever, I saw Karen, speechless, her jaw clenched, eyes darting from one camera phone to another as she realized the entire neighborhood was watching her get scolded by the federal government. Later that morning, I met with Rowan again, this time over coffee in my kitchen. He explained that while Karen wouldn't be formally arrested, her accomplice was being charged with criminal trespass, property tampering, and possibly violating the Electronics Privacy Act, depending on what tools he was carrying. Karen, for now, would be issued a protective restraining order and placed under watch, but Rowan assured me they would be keeping an eye on her behavior moving forward. That same day, the HOA called an emergency meeting. I wasn't even planning to attend. I figured they'd use it to protect themselves and sweep the chaos under the rug, but to my surprise, several of my neighbors urged me to go. They said the community needed closure, that people needed to see justice follow through, so I showed up. The room was packed, folding chairs lined every wall. Even Doug showed up, sitting quietly in the back with a stack of papers that looked suspiciously like divorce filings. The interim board members were flustered, trying to maintain order as people began demanding answers. Why was Karen allowed to abuse HOA rules? Why did the board protect her for so long? And most importantly, what were they going to do now that the feds had literally stepped in? After 15 minutes of awkward deflections and statements about misunderstandings, I stood up and cleared my throat. I didn't yell, I didn't point fingers, I simply played the footage from my phone. Karen sneaking onto my property, her accomplice grinding through the panel. The moment the agents intervened and the audio of her whispering about sabotaging my system, the room fell silent, except for the sound of one neighbor quietly muttering, "Oh my God," under his breath. That was all it took. The board backed in two. A corner voted unanimously to bar Karen from ever serving on any committee again. She was issued a permanent cease and desist regarding any interference with resident property. They also agreed to formally apologize to me and retract every fine, warning, and sanction ever placed on my address. I didn't clap. I didn't gloat. I just nodded and walked out, feeling like I had finally reset the balance. But the real twist came that night. Doug, apparently feeling emboldened by the board meeting, walked over to my house just after dark. He was holding a small wooden box. Inside were old flash drives, a printed binder, and a burner phone. He looked nervous as he handed it to me and said, "I didn't know where else to put this." Karen's been keeping a lot more than just HOA files. She's been recording people, spying on meetings, taking photos of neighbors through their windows. I didn't want to believe it, but after everything, I started looking. And now I think you should have this. The contents of that box made my skin crawl. Karen had been documenting everyone's business like a digital hoarder of paranoia. Notes on which houses left lights on past 10. Photos of deliveries, license plates, even a diagram of my backyard drawn in pencil. It was surveillance, plain and simple. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I backed up every file and sent them to Jenna and Rowan with a note that read, "I think the charger war was just the tip of the iceberg. Something deeper is going on here." What started as a ridiculous act of entitlement had revealed something darker. Karen hadn't just wanted control over a charger, she wanted control over the entire neighborhood, the locks, the fines, the fake signs, the phony requisition forms. They were just a cover. She'd been trying to build her own little surveillance empire, and I had been the first person who pushed back hard enough to expose it. I realized then that the final confrontation wasn't going to be about paint or wires or stolen electricity. It was going to be about truth, about what someone like Karen could become when no one held her accountable. And now that I had the evidence, I knew exactly how to end it once and for all. By the time morning came, my house was a war room. Jenna had already driven over with coffee in one hand and a notepad in the other, eyes still heavy with sleep, but brain firing on all cylinders. We sat across my kitchen table surrounded by flash drives, screenshots, and printed photos of what Karen had been collecting over the past year. It was more than strange behavior, it was obsession. She hadn't just kept tabs on me, but on nearly every household in the neighborhood. She had lists of children's names, schedules of when people left for work, notes on who had guests over and when, even receipts from packages she'd taken photos of while they were left unattended on porches. It wasn't just creepy, it was disturbing. This was no longer about a charger or HOA pettiness. This was about invasion, and Jenna knew exactly how to package it. We filed an immediate complaint with the local police, providing digital copies of the files. Jenna framed it perfectly in legal terms: malicious surveillance, stalking behavior, and coordinated harassment. While the officers took it seriously, enough to begin a formal report, we both knew enforcement would take time. Public opinion, though, that was something we could shift overnight. So Jenna leaked it. Not all of it, not anything too sensitive, just enough to expose the extent of Karen's obsession. A few clips, some blurred screenshots, a voice note where she bragged about how they don't even realize how much I know about them. We passed it through a trusted community Facebook admin who posted it with a warning. The post exploded in under 2 hours. Comment after comment rolled in. People who had defended her started deleting their comment. Others came forward with stories of strange encounters, of missing packages, of seeing her parked at odd hours watching houses. The community that had once rolled its eyes at Karen's antics was now openly terrified of her. The same people who used to politely wave at her during HOA meetings now avoided her street entirely. That night, someone spray-painted the words we know across her sidewalk. I didn't condone it, but I understood it. The anger was real. So was the betrayal. Doug filed for full custody of their child the next morning. Jenna helped him get an emergency order after presenting some of the material we found. The court didn't even hesitate. Karen was barred from seeing her child without supervision, and Doug officially moved into his sister's house across town. I saw him briefly before he left. He didn't say much, just nodded and said thank you, then got into his car and drove off with more relief than joy in his face. The next HOA meeting wasn't scheduled for another 2 weeks, but after everything that had happened, the board was forced to call an emergency session. This time, it wasn't to discipline me or pretend nothing had happened. It was to formally remove Karen from the HOA rolls. She didn't show up. Instead, she sent a letter through a newly hired lawyer claiming she was being unfairly targeted, that the neighborhood had become a hostile environment, and that she feared for her safety. The irony was rich, coming from someone who had secretly documented dozens of people for months without their knowledge. As the meeting began, I was asked to speak. I didn't plan a speech. I didn't need to. I just told the truth. I explained how it started with a lock, then a charger, then 2 painty bombs, and ended with a flash drive full of neighborhood surveillance. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't rant. I just laid out the facts. Then I played the audio of her whispering instructions to the man with the grinder, and the video of her sneaking onto my lawn while her toddler sat feet away. No one had anything to say after that. The vote to strip her of any remaining HOA privileges was unanimous. The board issued a lifetime ban on her participating in any community leadership role. They also publicly rescinded every sanction and fine that had ever been imposed on my property. In a final show of accountability, they approved a motion to introduce a new oversight process for HOA complaints to prevent future abuses. I walked out of that meeting not just vindicated but victorious, but I wasn't done. I still had one more card to play, and it was time to use it. That weekend, I hosted what I called the Community Recharge Party. It was part celebration, part reset button for everyone who had lived through months of Karen's chaos. I opened up my backyard, installed a few extra chargers, and invited every EV owner in the area to bring their vehicle for free charging and barbecue. Ed brought his famous peach cobbler. Jenna gave a short speech about neighborhood, right? Doug even stopped by for a few minutes, not to mingle, but to drop off one last thing, a set of mailbox keys he found in Karen's personal drawer. Apparently, she had made duplicates for over a dozen homes. I didn't tell anyone about the final surprise until the sun started to set. I dimmed the yard lights, gathered everyone around the side of the house, and flipped on a custom black light system we had installed just for the occasion. Suddenly, the paint I had used on Karen lit up bright under the UV glow, still faintly visible across parts of the driveway, hedge, and even a few of the tools she left behind in her last break-in. It wasn't a smear campaign. It was art. And, as people laughed and pointed, I turned to reveal the new sign I mounted beside my private charging port. It read, "Reserved for residents who mind their own business." Underneath it, I had bolted the original lock Karen had installed, now painted neon pink and encased in clear resin like a museum piece. Everyone clapped. Someone shouted legend. I just smiled and toasted with lemonade. I didn't need revenge anymore. I had community. I had peace. And most importantly, I had reclaimed every inch of what was mine. Later that night, after everyone had left and the lights were off, I sat out back and looked up at the stars. No alerts, no sensors, no camera pings, just silence. The kind of silence that only comes when the chaos is truly over. I knew Karen wouldn't disappear completely. People like her never vanish. They just retreat, stew, and eventually try to rebuild control somewhere else. But not here. Not anymore. Not in a neighborhood that had finally opened its eyes and stood up together. As I stood to head back inside, my watch buzzed once. Emotion alert. I tensed for a split second before seeing the footage. Just a cat this time, chubby, lazy, rolling across the lawn like it owned the place. I smiled. Let it have the charger. It had earned it more than Karen ever